The air in the VIP lounge was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and heavy silence. The Korean Mafia Boss sat in his usual corner booth, his eyes cold and unreadable, waiting for the woman he was set to marry. No one in the club dared to breathe too loudly near him, until a young waitress, her face pale and her hands shaking, approached his table. She didn't say a word. As she refilled his glass, she slid a small, crumpled napkin onto the table. On it, written in frantic, smeared ink, were 7 words that changed everything. Your fiancé sold you out. They're in position. The boss didn't flinch. He didn't reach for his gun. He simply took a slow sip of his drink while his men scanned the shadows, their hands moving toward their jackets. The city's most feared man had just been handed his death warrant by the woman he trusted most, and what he did next left the entire underworld in a state of shock. Stay with me until the end, because how this betrayal ended is a story no one saw coming. Before we dive into the details, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and tell me, what would you do if you were in his shoes? The chill of the VIP prep room always felt different from the rest of the lounge. Sharper, more clinical, and stripped of the curated warmth meant for the guests. 10 minutes ago, I had been back there, my fingers fumbling with a stack of silver dessert forks, trying to ignore the ache in my feet that came with a 12-hour shift. The heavy velvet curtains that separated the service area from the private alcoves hung like a theater backdrop, thick enough to muffle the jazz, but thin enough to betray a secret. I had reached for a bottle of sparkling water, when the click of designer heels against the marble floor froze me in place. It was a rhythmic, predatory sound I'd learned to recognize. Jai. I ducked behind a towering rack of vintage cognac, my breath hitching as the scent of her rose and gunpowder perfume drifted through the fabric. Through a narrow slit in the velvet, I saw her. She was illuminated by the soft glow of a service lamp, her silhouette as elegant and lethal as a drawn blade. She wasn't the doting fiancée I'd seen at table 5. The mask had slipped, revealing a face of cold, calculating iron. She held a burner phone to her ear, her voice a low, melodic hiss that made the hair on my arm stand up. The main course arrives in 10 minutes, she whispered, her Italian leather-gloved hand smoothing the silk of her dress. He's positioned perfectly, back to the glass, center of the frame. When the champagne pops at the neighboring table, that's your signal. I want it to be clean. I want him gone before the bubbles settle. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I watched as she snapped the phone shut and checked her reflection in a silver tray, adjusted a stray lock of hair, and practiced a sweet, deceptive smile she would carry back to man she was about to have slaughtered. 45 seconds after the drop, she murmured to herself, a final rehearsal to count down. She turned and swept back toward the lounge, the curtain fluttering in her wake. I stayed in the shadows, my hands trembling so hard the silver forks rattled on the tray. I was just a waitress, a girl who had moved across the world to disappear into the background of Seoul's neon lights. But as I looked at the scrap of paper on the prep table and the ballpoint pen tucked behind my ear, I realized that my invisibility was no longer a shield. It was the only weapon Ho-Jun had left. I grabbed the pen, my vision blurring with fear, and began to write. The ink felt like a heavy weight, each letter a nail in the coffin of the life I used to know. By the time I stepped out from behind those velvet curtains, the transition had begun. I wasn't just carrying a bill, I was carrying a death warrant, and the clock was already ticking. The transition from the cool, silent prep room to the vibrant, pulsing heat of the main lounge felt like stepping onto a gallows. The jazz was louder now, a frantic saxophone solo that seemed to mimic the erratic rhythm of my heart. I clutched the leather bill folder against my apron, my knuckles white, the scrawled warning inside feeling as heavy as a lead weight. Every step across the polished mahogany floor felt like a mile. I forced my back to stay straight, my chin to stay level, playing the part of the invisible servant I had been for 3 years. But for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I felt the gaze of the room shifting. It wasn't the guests who worried me, the tech moguls and plastic surgery heirs lost in their own reflections. It was the others, the ghosts of the lounge. To my left, near the bar, a man in a waiter's vest was polishing a glass. He was too still, his eyes not on the crystal but on the back of Ho-Jun's head. To my right, A security guard by the velvet rope adjusted his earpiece, his posture coiled like a snake ready to strike. They were the hidden assassins J.J. had spoken to, the shadows I had never noticed until I knew they were waiting for a signal. I could feel their eyes tracking me, burning holes into the small of my back, wondering why the black waitress was moving toward table 5 with such deliberate intent. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the sharp, ozone tang of impending violence. I passed the piano, the musician's fingers dancing over the keys, oblivious of the fact that his melody was about to be drowned out by gunfire. My peripheral vision caught a glint of steel beneath a service towel at a side station. They were in position. I looked toward the center of the room. Ho-Jun was a silhouette against the glittering Seoul skyline, the city lights reflecting off the glass wall behind him like a halo of cold diamonds. He looked untouchable, a king on a throne of light, while J.J. sat beside him. The picture of bridal devotion. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting delicately on his forearm. It was the hand of a lover. It was the hand of a Judas. My shoes made no sound on the plush carpet, but in my head, they sounded like thunder. I was 10 feet away. 5. The countdown J.J. had rehearsed in the prep room was nearing 0. I saw the champagne bucket being wheeled toward the neighboring table. I saw the waiter's hand grip the neck of the bottle. I didn't breathe. I didn't look at J.J. I focused only on the edge of the mahogany table, and the man who had no idea his world was about to shatter. I reached out, my hand trembling as I slid the leather folder onto the table, placing it directly over Ho-Jun's tapping fingers. The walk was over. The war was about to begin. The leather folder landed on the white linen with a soft, final thud, coming to rest precisely under Ho-Jun's hand. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. My hand retreated into folds of my black apron, and I felt the phantom heat of a note burning through the leather. Beside him, J.J. didn't stop her performance. She leaned in closer, her silk sleeve brushing his arm as she reached for her wine glass. "Everything all right, darling?" she cooed, her voice a perfect imitation of honey. "You seem distracted." Ho-Jun didn't answer her. His gaze remained fixed on me, not with anger, but with a terrifying, piercing curiosity. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a servant caught in the gravitational pull of a king. My breath was shallow, caught in the back of my throat, as I watched his long, elegant fingers flip the folder open. He didn't move a muscle as he read. He didn't gasp, and he didn't reach for a weapon. But I saw the exact moment the information settled into his blood. The relaxed, predatory rhythm of his tapping fingers stopped instantly. His eyes, which had been a bored, obsidian black, suddenly sharpened, reflecting the neon city lights behind him with a new, lethal intensity. The temperature at the table seemed to plummet. J.J.'s smile faltered just a fraction. She saw the change, the way his shoulders went rigid, the way his jaw set like granite. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then up at me, a flash of cold, murderous realization crossing her face. She knew. She didn't know what I'd written, but she knew the invisible girl had just broken the silence. Ho-Jun closed the folder with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet lounge. He looked at J.J., and for the first time, I saw him look at her not as a partner, but as a target. His eyes were no longer those of a man at dinner. They were the eyes of a man who had already envisioned how he would burn the world down to find the truth. "The service here is impeccable tonight," Ho-Jun said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that made the crystal glasses on the table hum. He didn't look away from J.J.'s pale face as he reached out and gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Behind us, at the neighboring table, the waiter's hand tightened on the champagne bottle. The silver foil began to tear. The signal was seconds away. Ho-Jun's gaze shifted back to me for a split second. In that look, there was a silent command. "Get down." I didn't wait for the cork to pop. I didn't wait for the glass to shatter. I saw the fire ignite in his eyes, and I knew that the man who had been carved from marble had just turned into a hurricane. The champagne cork didn't just pop. It detonated like a starting pistol. In the fraction of a second that followed, the curated elegance of the lounge vanished. I saw the waiter at the neighboring table drop the bottle, but he wasn't reaching for a towel. His hand disappeared into his vest. My heart stopped, But Ho Jun was already moving. Down, he roared, the word less a shout and more physical force. The first high-velocity round struck the floor-to-ceiling glass wall directly behind his head. The reinforced pane didn't just crack. It pulverized, exploding into a million diamond-sharp shards that caught the neon glow of Seoul before raining down like lethal hail. The sound was deafening, a crystalline roar that drowned out the jazz and the sudden, shrill screams of the elite. Before I could even scream, a heavy, powerful hand clamped onto my shoulder. Ho Jun didn't just pull me. He tackled me, his massive frame acting as a human shield as he dragged me over the mahogany edge of the table. We hit the plush carpet hard, the scent of spilled Cabernet and gunpowder filling my lungs. Above us, the air whistled with the passage of more lead, thudding into the expensive upholstery and shattering the porcelain plates we had served only minutes ago. Ho Jun, help me. Jae-jae's voice rose above the chaos, a pitch-perfect imitation of a terrified victim. I peered through the tangle of chair legs and saw her huddled on the other side of the table, her eyes wide, playing her part to the bitter end. Ho Jun's face was inches from mine. His obsidian eyes were calm, terrifyingly so, as he reached into his jacket and drew a sleek, matte black handgun. He didn't even glance at his fiancée. His focus was entirely on the perimeter, his ears tracking the footsteps of the assassins closing in. Then the world went black. The lounge's power grid was severed, plunging the glittering VIP section into a tomb-like darkness, save for the strobing muzzle flashes from the hallway. In the sudden gloom, the only thing I could feel was the vibration of Ho Jun's chest against my arm, the cold, hard weight of the folder I dropped, now soaked in wine and trampled in the dirt. "Stay behind me," he hissed, his voice a low vibration that cut through the ringing in my ears. "If you move, you die." The invisible waitress was gone, in the darkness of the shattered lotus. I was the only thing Ho Jun was determined to keep alive, and as the first return fire echoed from his own men, I realized the man I had saved was about to turn this sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. The darkness was absolute for only a heartbeat before the emergency strobes kicked in, bathing the carnage in a rhythmic, sickening crimson. Through the haze of pulverized glass and drywall dust, figures emerged, men in charcoal suits who moved with a terrifying, synchronized violence. They didn't look like security. They looked like a cleanup crew for the apocalypse. "Sector clear." A voice barked over the ringing in my ears. Ho Jun rose from the floor like a shadow taking form, his hand still clamped onto my upper arm with a grip that promised bruises. He didn't look at the bodies slumped over neighboring tables or the panicked guests crawling toward the elevators. His eyes were fixed on the exit, his weapon raised in a steady, two-handed grip. "Move," he commanded, his voice a low vibration against the chaos. He didn't give me a choice. I was hauled upright, my heels skidding over the blood-slick marble. As we sprinted toward the service entrance, a flash of white caught my eye. Jae-jae. She was standing amidst the wreckage, her silk dress splattered with red, her face twisted in a mask of silent, thwarted rage as she watched us retreat. She made a move toward a fallen weapon, but one of Ho Jun's men stepped into her line of sight, his submachine gun leveled at her chest. The message was clear. The hunt was over and she had lost. We burst through the heavy fire doors into the cool night air of the back alley. The transition was jarring. The smell of rain and exhaust replacing the scent of gunpowder. 3 black SUVs sat idling, their engines growling like restless beasts. The lead enforcer threw open the rear door of the center vehicle. Inside, now, Ho Jun growled, shoving me into the plush leather interior before sliding in beside me. As the door slammed shut, muffled thuds echoed from inside the lounge. The sound of secondary explosions, or perhaps the tactical sanitization of the crime scene. Through the tinted rear window, I watched as a tongue of orange flame licked at the gold-leaf windows of the shattered lotus. The sanctuary where I had spent 3 years being a ghost was being erased, turned into a funeral pyre for the life I used to know. The SUV lurched forward, tires screaming against the asphalt as we tore away from the curb. Ho Jun didn't look back at the fire. He sat in the shadows of the cabin, his chest heaving slightly, his silhouette framed by the passing neon lights of Gangnam. He reached up, slowly holstering his weapon, before turning his head to look at me. The adrenaline was fading. leaving a cold, hollow terror in its wake. "You're shaking," he observed, his voice devoid of comfort but heavy with a new, dark possessiveness. I looked down at my hands. They were stained with wine and ash. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was a witness, a savior, and a fugitive, all trapped in a steel box with a man who was about to take me into the heart of his storm. The lounge was burning, and my bridge back to the world was burning with it. The SUV climbed the winding, private road with a predatory hum, the city of souls shrinking into a distant carpet of neon sparks behind us. We passed through a gate of reinforced steel that looked more like the entrance to a military bunker than a residence. This was the fortress, a sprawling estate of glass and dark stone carved directly into the side of the mountain, hidden by a canopy of ancient pines. When the car finally hissed to a stop, the doors were opened by men who didn't look like waiters or bodyguards. They looked like soldiers. Ho-Jun stepped out first, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the driveway. He didn't wait for me to move. He reached back into the cabin and pulled me out, his grip firm but no longer bruising. The air up here was thin and freezing, a sharp contrast to the smoke-clogged heat of the lounge. I stood there, still in my torn apron and stained white shirt, feeling like a glitch in a masterpiece of high-end architecture. The interior of the house was a cathedral of silence, filled with minimalist furniture and the scent of expensive cedar. "Take her to the guest wing," Ho-Jun directed his lead enforcer, without looking at me. "Secure the perimeter. No one goes in or out without my thumbprint." I followed the guard down a long hallway of polished obsidian, my reflection ghosting alongside me, a mess of ash and wild hair. The room they led me to was beautiful, a sanctuary of silk sheets and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, but the heavy click of the electronic lock behind me felt like a sentence. I walked the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. Below, I could see the lights of the city where I had lived as an invisible ghost for 3 years. That life was gone. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the girl who had seen the queen's mask slip, the girl who had saved the king, and the girl who now carried the most dangerous secret in Korea. I realized then that this wasn't a rescue, not in the traditional sense. Ho-Jun hadn't brought me here out of the goodness of his heart. He had brought me here because I was the only witness to his fiancée's treachery, and in his world, people like me were either assets or liabilities. As I watched the headlights of his patrol cars circle the grounds, a chilling thought settled in my chest. I was safe from Jae-jae's assassins, but I was now the guest of a man who killed for a living. I knew too much to be set free, and as the reality of the fortress settled around me, I wondered if I would ever walk under the neon lights of Seoul as a free woman again. The library was a cavern of dark wood and leather-bound secrets, smelling of aged paper and the sharp, expensive sting of Ho-Jun scotch. He sat behind a desk of polished mahogany that looked like an altar, the only light coming from a single desk lamp that carved deep shadows into planes of his face. He hadn't changed his clothes, but the blood had been cleaned from his hands. He looked more like a judge now than a soldier. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the velvet chair across from him. I sat. The oversized silk robe a maid had provided feeling like borrowed armor. My heart was still doing that frantic, jackrabbit dance against my ribs. For a long minute, he didn't speak. He simply watched me, his obsidian eyes scanning my face, as if he were reading a map of a territory he intended to conquer. "Jae-jae was careful," he said finally, his voice a low, melodic vibration that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "She has spent 3 years perfecting the art of being the perfect companion. My security detail is the best in the country. And yet, a waitress from the Midwest, a girl who is supposed to be invisible, is the only one who saw the knife behind her smile." He leaned forward, the light hitting the sharp line of his jaw. "Tell me exactly what you heard in that prep room. Every word, every inflection." I told him. I spoke about the velvet curtains, the burner phone, and the coldness in Jae-jae's voice when she described his position against the glass. I told him about the 60-second countdown. As I spoke, his expression didn't shift, but the air in the room grew heavy, charged with quiet, redirected fury. When I finished, he didn't ask about the logistics. He didn't ask how I'd managed to write the note. Instead, he stood up and walked around the desk, stopping just inches from my chair. He looked down at me, his presence overwhelming, a mountain of dark intent. Why? He asked. The word was short, clipped. You knew who I was. You knew that involvement meant death, or at the very least this. He gestured to the locked doors. You could have stayed in the shadows. You could have let the glass break and walked away a free woman. Why did you risk your life for a man you don't even know? I looked up at him, my voice trembling but steady. Because I'm a waitress, Ho Jun. I spend my life watching people. I've seen you leave tips for the busboys when you think no one is looking. I've seen you treat the staff like humans when everyone else treats us like ghosts. I took a breath. And because I couldn't live with the sound of that glass breaking, if I knew I could have stopped it. Ho Jun reached out, his thumb brushing my jawline with a touch that was unexpectedly soft, yet felt like a brand. Bravery is a rare currency in my world, Tessie, he whispered. And you just spent a fortune on me. The interrogation was over, but as he looked at me, I realized the debt between us was only just beginning to be calculated. The stillness of the library was shattered by the sharp, rhythmic vibration of phones on the mahogany desk. 3 different devices, each a lifeline to a segment of Ho Jun's empire. He didn't look away from me as he reached out and pressed the speaker on the farthest one. The voice that came through was panicked, breathless, and punctuated by the sound of tires screaming against asphalt. The northern warehouses, boss. They were waiting for us. Jai's men. They've seized the shipment. Ho Jun's thumb remained on my jaw for a second longer than necessary before he withdrew it. His warmth replaced by a sudden, arctic distance. He stood straight, his eyes shifting from the man who had been softened by curiosity back into the monster who ruled the city. Burn it, Ho Jun said. His voice was flat, devoid of the tremor of anger, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Burn the warehouses. Burn the shipment. And if Jai's cousin is still inside the perimeter, leave the doors locked. Boss! That's 20 million in. I don't care about the paper. Ho Jun interrupted, his gaze fixed on the dark window. I care about the message. If she wants a war of attrition, I will give her a scorched earth. He ended the call and immediately picked up the next. For the next hour, I sat frozen in the velvet chair, a silent witness to the systematic dismantling of a treasonous network. It was a bloodless purge from where I sat, but the words he used, liquidate, erase, sanitize, painted a picture of a city currently dripping with the consequences of my note. He was moving pieces on a board I couldn't even see, cutting off Jai's funding, neutralizing her loyalists, and isolating her until she had nothing left but the silk dress on her back. Between calls, he would glance at me, his eyes check and see if I was breaking. He wanted me to see this. He wanted the invisible girl to understand that the man she had saved wasn't a hero in a fairy tale. He was a tidal wave. This was the ruthless reality of his world. There were no apologies, only debt and retribution. By the final call, the panic in the voices on the other end had turned into a deathly, respectful silence. The coup had been smothered in its crib. She's trapped in the safe house in Incheon, his lead enforcer reported. What are your orders? Ho Jun looked at me then, his hand tightening around a crystal scotch glass until I thought it might shatter. Keep her alive, he murmured. I want her watched as I give everything that was supposed to be hers to the woman who actually earned it. He hung up, the room falling into a heavy, ringing silence. The purge was over, and as he turned his dark, predatory gaze back to me, I realized that while the war with Jai was won, my personal struggle for freedom had only just begun. He had cleared the world of his enemies, leaving only the 2 of us in the center of the wreckage. The morning sun began to bleed over the jagged mountain peaks, casting long, golden fingers to the library's floor-to-ceiling windows. The violence of the night had been replaced by a heavy, profound stillness. Ho Jun stood by the glass, silhouetted against the awakening city, his silhouette unyielding. He had discarded his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing the corded muscle of his forearms and the weight of a man who had just moved mountains to stay alive. He turned to look at me, and the predatory sharpness in his eyes had softened into something far more complicated, something that looked dangerously like respect. The world you knew is gone, Tessie, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. The gilded lotus is a shell of ash. Jai's remaining loyalists believe you were a co-conspirator who turned, and her enemies believe you are my greatest vulnerability. To them, You are no longer an invisible waitress. You are the woman who brought down a queen. He walked toward me, stopping only when the scent of cedar and expensive scotch filled my senses. He reached into his pocket and placed 2 items on the desk: a thick envelope filled with more cash than I had earned in 3 years, and a small, encrypted burner phone. "Here is your choice," he murmured, his gaze locking onto mine. "Take the money. My men will escort you to the airport. You can fly to London, Paris, or back to the States. I will provide you with a new name and a clean slate. You can try to be a ghost again." I looked at the money, then back at him. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "And the second choice?" I whispered. Ho Jun stepped closer, his hand rising to cup the side of my face. His thumb traced a line on my cheekbone with a possessive, lingering heat that made my breath hitch. "You stay. You remain under my roof, under my name, and under my protection. No one will ever look past you again. No one will ever treat you like a shadow. But you will belong to this world. You will belong to me." The air in the room seemed to vanish. He wasn't just offering a home. He was offering a throne in a kingdom of shadows. I saw the flickers of gold in his dark irises, the hidden debt he was finally acknowledging. He was a man who didn't know how to say thank you, so he was offering me his life in exchange for mine. I realized then that there was no real choice. The moment I wrote that note, I had stepped across a line I could never recross. I didn't reach for the money. Instead, I let my hand rest over his on my cheek, feeling the steady, thrumming pulse of man I had saved. "I'm tired of being a ghost, Ho Jun," I said softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, sharp, dark, and utterly certain. He didn't need to say anything else. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, marking the end of my life as a witness and the beginning of my life as his. The law of the street was gone. In this fortress, under the rising sun, there was only his law, and I was now a part of it.